How's it going, everyone? So we have this Stihl BR600. That doesn't really matter though. The matter is why you clicked on the video. We just got done installing a carburetor and we need to tune it. So this is going to be an aftermarket carb or OEM carb. However, caveat, usually OEM carbs are pretty well tuned, so don't really have to worry about it. But especially if you're doing like stuff like this from Stihl, they're usually pretty good. If you get something that's like Craftsman, you might have to do that. Name brand Echo Stihl, you probably do very little to no adjustments. Having said that, let's say you bought a new carb and you still need it. More likely than not, you bought an aftermarket one and it's completely out of adjustment. So this is the carb that came out of the machine. We want to look inside there. We want to see in there, and there's special types of adjusting needles. If you look at it, if you go to Amazon or eBay and type in 2-cycle adjustment drivers, you'll get a kit, and it's like 8 or 10 of them in there. Look and see what type you have. There's spline, there's D, there's double D. I like those, and that just goes from there. I need a hexagon one for this one. In addition to that, that's just for the fuel. This is an idle mixture, well, idle screw. It's not a mixture whatsoever, but it holds the throttle plate open a little bit. Now, what we have on this one is just a normal Phillips. However, the one that we have in the machine now is a flathead, so be very careful. You don't want to assume that it is just a Phillips or a flathead, because you might be stripping out a screw. That's bad news. And that's about it. We're assuming that everything primes, it's not leaking, everything's good to go. Let me explain what I'm going to be doing. First and foremost, I want to idle correctly. If you are unaware, sometimes they say high and low by the little letters on there. Sometimes they don't. Just know the adjusting screw that is closest to the machine is the low, and the one that outside is the high. So pretty easy. So when I say high and low, that's what I'm talking about. Low, because the machine is over here, and high, the air filter is over here. Next, once we get it to idle, we're going to get it to rev up. Now, if it dies when you rev up, that's a bad thing. But if it does rev up, then we know that at least we are in a ballpark. If it doesn't rev up at all, then we're going to start. So you're going to see me do this, and then I'm going to sit down, give you like a good 10-15 minute explanation on this carb, because it's going to be a lot easier to see what I did and what you should do next. So sit down, relax, and let me get started. First things first, I usually will turn the idle in a little bit. It's a lot easier to start that way usually. Just a faster engine speed, it's easier to start. I have my 2 screwdrivers handy. Let's go ahead and get it started. Now, it's been primed. It has fuel. Let's get a pull. Still revving up pretty high, so I'm thinking the cable might be pinched and not letting the throttle go down. So I'm going to take a minute or two and take a look. Okay, so bonus thing about this, the cable was a little bit crimped. This happens all the time when you install aftermarket carb. Sometimes the cable is a little bit different. So anyway, make sure after you're done installing it, everything moves appropriately. Having said that, we still have our correct tools, and ideally, like I said, we're going to get to idle, and then we're going to get to go to high, and then we're going to take it from there, or go from there and see what we have to do. See how easy that was? So that's pretty much it. We're pretty much done with that. So I think we're going to sit down with the carb, and I'll tell you some things about it, and I kind of give you a little bit more of a better display. We now have the carb. Air filters right here, engines right here, adjustment screws. Okay, so what did I do in the beginning? So there's two things. We're adjusting the low, but like I said, we turn in the idle speed a little bit, and then once we get to the point where it's easily startable, then we take our driver, and depending on what we see, if we see a lot of blue smoke coming out of the muffler, that means rich. So that means tightening the screw. And if we don't see anything and it's really hard to start, and maybe it's even dying, then we're going to loosen that screw. That means it's lean. Lean is going to make things a lot harder. Things will run rich. They'll run poorly, but they'll run. So if you're having a really hard time starting it or keeping it going, assuming that you don't have other problems, of course, try richening or loosening the low screw. So now I then took the screwdriver and I sped it up, slowed it down until I got to a certain RPM that I was happy with. And at that point in time, I went back and I leaned it out until the speed got a little too high. And then once it gets a little too high, I then richened it up, and then I lowered the idle speed. Basically what happens is this: I don't really want to run rich when it's idling. It's just a waste of fuel. But if we let it run optimally at idle, then when we throttle it up, it's just going to stall because it needs a little bit of richness in order to really go from high to low. So I did about a fifth to a quarter of a turn out once it gets to the RPM that I think it was okay, and then I sped up the engine a little bit just to kind of get back to where it was. A quarter of a turn really didn't lower the RPM hardly at all, but I wanted to take it back to the same RPM as it was. I then gave a throttle. It actually did pretty well. So I didn't really have to do a whole lot. If it dies, then same thing. It might be lean, riching it up. If you give a throttle and just plumes of blue smoke comes out, it's obviously too rich. You tighten it up. We're now working on this side. Mine wasn't doing any of that. So what I did is I held down the throttle all the way, and then I richened it until the speed started to get pretty low and I started to see smoke, and then I leaned it out until the speed went to the highest it possibly could, and then I did another quarter turn. Like I said, you don't want it to run lean. Running lean in a 2 cycle is not really good for it. It gets hot. Not a good idea. It does need to run a little bit rich. I then went back to idle, and everything seemed to be fine. Sometimes when you do this, you will have to readjust the idle a hair or two. Not that much. It's usually pretty decent with the idle. But just know if you do have to adjust the idle, you are also going to have to readjust the high again. Just know that. I didn't have to, so you don't have to. I didn't have to worry about that. Next, I let it sit there for a little bit. After you let it sit there for a little bit, give it full throttle again. If it hesitates, then you need to richen your high up a little bit, or potentially you could even richen up the low another 1/8 of a turn. See which one works better. Majority of the time, it's going to be the high. However, there are occasions, if your low is way too lean, that you will have to richen it up. Remember how I told you we need to do like a quarter of a turn so it doesn't like stumble? That's the reason why. Maybe a quarter isn't enough. You need to do a little bit more. But it revved right up, so I was happy with it. I will use this machine a little bit more. That's the real key, is you need to use it right after, like a good 10-15 minutes at least, and carry your screws or your drivers with you. And then when you're using it and gets fully warmed up, that's when you can really dial it in. Same thing, if you let go of the throttle and it feels like it's want to die or it's super jumpy, lean it out a little bit. If you see blue smoke, lean it out a little bit. If it gets warm and just constantly wants to die, then you might want to richen it up. But that's pretty rare. Usually what will end up happening is you'll have to lean it out. So once we're done, that's it. Aftermarket carbs are pretty easy. This actually came in the kit with the carbs, so we didn't really have to do anything with it. We didn't have to buy it. So that's kind of like the beautiful part about it. The only real downside is some aftermarket carbs you will have to dance around a lot. So just know that blue smoke or real jumpy or boggy sounding, it's too rich, it's hard to start, maybe revving way too high. Could be too lean, or your idle is too high. So play around with it. The first time I did this probably took a good 15-20 minutes at least, maybe longer. So if you don't get it as soon as I did, don't feel bad. I've done thousands of these. I know what I'm looking for. If you have any questions, however, feel free to leave a comment below. But other than that, this is how you tune a aftermarket carb after you install it. If you have any questions, like I said, leave a comment below. If this helped you out, leave a thumbs up, because that definitely helps me out. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you like watching videos like this, I do post quite often, and I love to have you watching. Catch you on the next one. Have a good night.